The afternoon sun beat down on the busy street corner as 14-year-old Andre wiped sweat from his forehead. His basketball shoes, worn at the edges but still his prized possession, squeaked against the sidewalk as he jogged toward the bus. Stop. He'd stayed late after practice to work on his free throws, and now he was racing to catch the last bus that would get him home in time for dinner. His mom had texted twice already. "Don't be late, Grandma made your favorite stew." The thought of his grandmother's cooking made his stomach rumble. After 2 hours of running drills, he was starving. The bus was already at the curb when Andre rounded the corner. He waved his arm frantically, his backpack bouncing against his spine. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, spotted him and waited those extra few seconds. "Thanks, Mr. Wilson," Andre panted as he climbed aboard, fishing in his pocket for his bus pass. Mr. Wilson nodded. "Cutting it close today, young man." Coach kept us late. Andre swiped his card and moved down the aisle, his eyes scanning for an empty seat. The bus was packed with the usual after-work crowd, office workers with loosened ties staring at their phones, nurses in scrubs heading to or from shifts, and students like him, earbuds in, worlds away. Near the back, he spotted the last empty seat and made his way toward it. His legs ached from practice, and the weight of his backpack, stuffed with textbooks and gym clothes, felt like it was pulling him toward the floor. The bus lurched forward just as he reached the seat, and he dropped into it gratefully, letting his backpack fall between his knees. Andre leaned his head against the window, feeling the vibration of the bus through his temple. The glass was cool against his skin. Outside, the city moved by in a blur of storefronts, traffic lights, and people hurrying home. 5 more stops and he'd be walking through his front door, greeting his mom and little brother, telling them about how Coach had praised his defensive skills today. He closed his eyes for just a moment, letting the gentle rocking of the bus and the low hum of conversations wash over him. Someone nearby was playing music through headphones, just loud enough that he could make out a faint beat. A baby gurgled a few seats ahead, and someone laughed at something on their phone. 3 stops later, the bus pulled up to the corner of Maple and 5th. Andre opened his eyes and watched as new passengers climbed aboard. An old man with a cane made his way slowly up the steps. A young woman with a small child in tow followed. And then, moving with careful, measured steps, came an elderly lady. She must have been in her 80s at least. Her hair was completely white, pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a simple blue dress with a light cardigan despite the heat, and sensible shoes that looked well worn but polished. In one hand she gripped a wooden cane, and in the other, she clutched a small purse close to her body. The bus started, moving before she had found a seat. She stumbled slightly, catching herself on a handrail. Her face showed no panic, just a quiet determination as she steadied herself. No one looked up from their phones or conversations. The old man with the cane had found a priority seat near the front, and the young mother had squeezed in beside someone else, her child on her lap. Andre watched the elderly woman grasp the rail tightly as the bus took a corner. Her knuckles were swollen with arthritis, and he could see the effort it took for her to keep her balance. Without thinking twice, he stood up. "Ma'am," he said, his voice cracking a little as it sometimes did these days. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Ma'am, you can have my seat." The woman turned toward him, her eyes finding his. They were a clear, bright blue that stood out against her dark skin, and there was something in them, a sharpness, a kind of knowing, that made Andre stand up straighter. "Thank you, young man," she said. Her voice was soft but steady. "That's very kind of you." Andre stepped into the aisle, making room for her to pass. She moved carefully, one hand still on the rail until she was positioned in front of the seat. He offered his arm for support, the way his mother had taught him to do for his own grandmother, and she took it, lowering herself slowly onto the seat. "My bones aren't what they used to be," she said with a small smile that created a web of fine lines around her eyes. "I appreciate your thoughtfulness." "No problem," Andre replied, grabbing onto the overhead rail as the bus picked up speed. He adjusted his backpack, slinging it over one shoulder to make more room in the crowded aisle. The woman settled her purse in her lap and smoothed her dress. Andre noticed her hands, They were workers' hands, with calluses and small scars that told stories of a lifetime of labor. They reminded him of his grandfather's hands, hands that had built things, fixed things, held things together when they threatened to fall apart. The bus hit a pothole, and Andre tightened his grip on the rail. His basketball coach's voice echoed in his head. Plant your feet, find your balance, be ready to move. Good advice on the court and on a moving bus. From his standing position, Andre could see out the windows on both sides of the bus now. They were passing through downtown where tall buildings cast long shadows across the streets. People hurried along the sidewalks, some heading home like him, others maybe going out for the evening. A street musician on the corner played saxophone, and even through the closed windows of the bus, Andre could see how passers-by slowed their pace as they walked by, some dropping money into the open case at the musician's feet. 2 more stops to go. Andre shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His muscles were really feeling today's practice now. Coach had pushed them hard, getting ready for the championship game next week. Andre wasn't a starter, but Coach had been giving him more playing time lately, and he was determined to prove himself worthy of that trust. He glanced down and noticed the elderly woman was watching him, not in the casual way people look at strangers on public transportation, but with a focused interest that made him wonder if he had something on his face or shirt. "You play basketball?" she asked, gesturing toward the logo on his gym bag that peeked out from his unzipped backpack. Andre nodded. "Yes, ma'am, for my school team." "I can tell," she said. "You have a basketball player's build. Tall, good posture." She paused, studying him. "My late husband was a coach for many years. At Jefferson High." "Really?" "That's our biggest rival," Andre said, then quickly added, "But they're a good school." The woman laughed softly. "Yes, they are, and so is yours, I'm sure." She tilted her head slightly. "What position do you play?" "Guard, mostly. Sometimes small forward." She nodded knowingly. "Quick on your feet, then. Good court vision." Andre couldn't help but smile. This lady knew her basketball. "I'm trying to get better at my three-point shot. My percentage isn't where I want it to be." "It's all in the follow-through," she said, mimicking a shooting motion with her right hand. "My husband always said that most players rush it. They're already thinking about the next play before the ball has left their fingertips." "That's exactly what Coach tells us," Andre said, surprised. The bus began to slow as it approached the next stop. More passengers got on, filling the aisle even more. Andre found himself pressed closer to where the woman sat, still holding on to the overhead rail to keep his balance. As the bus pulled away from the curb, the elderly woman opened her purse and took out a small notepad and pen. Andre didn't pay much attention. He was busy texting his mom that he was almost home. But from the corner of his eye, he saw the woman writing something, her penmanship careful and deliberate. She tore the page from the notepad with precision, folded it once and then again. 1 more stop to go. Andre put his phone back in his pocket and readjusted his grip on the rail. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows on the west side of the bus, painting everything in a golden light. In that moment, with the warm glow and the gentle sway of the bus, Andre felt a strange sense of peace. Here he was, standing on this bus, having a normal conversation with this elderly woman about basketball of all things. Something about it felt important, though he couldn't have explained why. The bus turned onto Andre's street. He reached up to pull the cord that signaled his stop was next, but before he could, the elderly woman spoke again. "This is your stop coming up, isn't it?" she asked. Andre nodded, surprised. "Yes, ma'am. How did you know?" She smiled, and there was a warmth in it that reminded him of his grandmother. "Just a feeling," she said. The bus slowed as it approached Andre's stop. He reached for the cord to signal the driver, but the elderly woman was already motioning for him to come closer. There was something in her eyes, a quiet urgency that made him lean down toward her. "Young man," she said, her voice surprisingly strong against the rumble of the bus engine. "Please take this." She pressed the folded note into his palm, and closed his fingers around it with her weathered hand. Her touch was light, but deliberate. Andre felt the paper against his skin, thin and crisp. "What's this?" he asked, confused but polite. The woman just smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Read it when you get home," she said. "It's important." The bus jerked to a stop and Andre had to grab the rail again to keep his balance. He slipped the note into his jeans pocket, feeling strangely like he'd been given something valuable, though he had no idea what was written on that small piece of paper. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, adjusting his backpack on his shoulder. "For the basketball, advice too." She nodded, and as Andre turned to leave, she added, "You remind me of someone important." Before he could ask what she meant, the bus driver called out, "Fifth and Oak." Andre needed to move. Other passengers were already filing toward the exit. He gave the woman a quick wave goodbye and made his way down the aisle, carefully stepping around bags and outstretched legs. As he descended the steps, he glanced back. The elderly woman was watching him go, her expression thoughtful. For a brief moment, their eyes met again, and Andre felt a strange connection, like a conversation without words had passed between them. Then the doors closed with a hiss, and the bus pulled away from the curb, carrying the mysterious woman out of sight. Standing on the sidewalk, Andre had the sudden urge to open the note right then and there. His fingers touched the edge of the paper in his pocket, but something held him back. The woman had said to read it at home. It felt right to honor that request. The walk to his house was short, just 3 blocks from the bus stop. The neighborhood was quiet at this time of day. Some kids playing in a yard down the street, a man walking his dog, a couple of older gentlemen sitting on a porch playing chess. Andre waved to Mr. Jenkins, who was watering his prized roses, and got a friendly nod in return. His mind kept coming back to the elderly woman. Who was she? What was so important that she needed to write it down? He tried to remember if he'd ever seen her before on his regular bus route, but he couldn't place her. The way she spoke about basketball, though, that had been real knowledge, not just making conversation. As he turned onto his street, the smell of his grandmother's cooking reached him even before he saw his house, a small, well-kept place with blue shutters and flower boxes his mom tended with care. His little brother's bike was propped against the porch steps, and through the front window, Andre could see movement in the kitchen. He jogged up the steps, his keys already in hand. As soon as he opened the door, the rich aroma of beef stew and fresh bread enveloped him. His stomach growled in response. "That you, Andre?" His mother's voice called from the kitchen. "Yeah, Mom, I'm home," he answered, dropping his backpack by the door and kicking off his shoes. His little brother, Ty, 7 years old and a bundle of energy even at the end of the day, came racing down the hallway. "Andre, guess what? I got an A on my science project, and Ms. Patel said it was the best in the class, and Grandma's making chocolate cake for dessert because I did so good." Andre laughed, giving his brother a high five. "That's awesome, little man. I knew all that work would pay off." His mother appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel. She had her nurse's scrubs on, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, looking tired but happy to see him. "How was practice?" she asked. "Good. Coach says I might start in the game next week." His mother's face lit up with pride. "Really, that's wonderful news." Andre smiled, but his hand went to his pocket, feeling the outline of the folded note. "Something strange happened on the bus today," he said. His mother raised an eyebrow. "Strange how?" Andre pulled the note from his pocket but didn't unfold it yet. "There was this elderly lady. I gave her my seat and we talked about basketball a bit. Then, right before my stop, she gave me this note and told me to read it when I got home." His mother frowned slightly. "What does it say?" "I don't know yet. Haven't read it." His grandmother appeared behind his mother, wiping her hands on her apron. At 73, she moved slower than she once had, but her presence still filled any room she entered. "Well, don't keep us in suspense," she said, her voice warm with curiosity. "Read it." Andre carefully unfolded the note. The handwriting was elegant, each letter formed with precision. He read it silently first, his eyes widening as he took in the words. Then, at his family's urging, he read it aloud. My name is Mrs. Eleanor Winters. 57 years ago, your grandfather, Thomas Walker, gave up his seat for me on a segregated bus in Montgomery. I was pregnant and ill. When no one else would acknowledge me, he stood. His kindness gave me hope during terrible times. I've never forgotten his face, and you look just like him. Some kindness runs in the blood. Please call the number below. Beneath the message was a phone number and an address in the old part of town, not far from where his grandparents had lived years ago. The kitchen fell silent. Andre looked up from the note to see his grandmother's hand covering her mouth, her eyes suddenly bright with tears. His mother stood frozen, the dish towel clutched tightly in her hands. Grandma? Andre said softly. Did you know about this? About Grandpa and this Mrs. Winters? His grandmother slowly lowered her hand. Thomas never talked much about those days, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He said some things were better left in the past, that looking forward was what mattered. She reached for the note with slightly trembling fingers. May I? Andre handed it to her, watching as she studied the handwriting, tracing her finger over the words as if to confirm they were real. His grandfather had passed away 3 years ago, taking with him stories that, apparently, had never been shared with the family. I remember him mentioning Montgomery, his grandmother continued. He was there for almost a year working construction before he came back home and we got married, but he never told me about any incident on a bus. She looked up at Andre, her eyes searching his face. She's right, though. You do look like him at that age. Same eyes, same way of carrying yourself. His mother took the note next, reading it, again silently. This address, she said. It's over on Willow Street, isn't it? Just a few blocks from where you and Dad lived when you first got married. His grandmother nodded. That's right. It's an old neighborhood. Most of the original families are long gone now. She handed the note back to Andre. What are you thinking, grandson? Andre looked down at the note, then back at his family. I think I want to call her, to find out more about Grandpa and what happened on that bus. His mother and grandmother exchanged a look. There was something unspoken passing between them, a shared understanding of the weight of history, of stories untold and now suddenly within reach. I think that's a fine idea, his grandmother finally said. Thomas would have wanted you to know. He just didn't know how to talk about those times. They were... She paused, searching for the right word. Complicated. Can we call her now? Ty piped up, having been quietly listening to the adults, sensing the importance of the moment, even if he didn't fully understand it. Andre looked at his mother, who checked her watch. It's getting late, she said. Maybe tomorrow would be better. After school. His grandmother nodded in agreement. Yes, tomorrow. Some conversations shouldn't be rushed. She turned back toward the kitchen. Now let's eat before the stew gets cold. Andre must be starving after practice. As they gathered around the table, the conversation turned to everyday things. Ty's science project, his mother's day at the hospital, his grandmother's plan to visit her sister next weekend. But the note sat on the counter, a reminder of an unexpected connection to the past, a story waiting to be uncovered. After dinner, Andre helped with the dishes, his mind still spinning with questions. Who was this Mrs. Winters? What exactly had happened on that bus in Montgomery? And why had his grandfather never mentioned it? Later, as he got ready for bed, Andre took the note from his pocket again, reading the words one more time. His grandfather had been a quiet man, steady and kind. He'd taught Andre how to change a tire, how to throw a proper spiral with a football, how to look someone in the eye when shaking their hand. But he'd rarely spoken about his youth, about the times before he met Andre's grandmother. Andre pinned the note to his bulletin board, right next to his basketball schedule and a photo of him with his team. Tomorrow after school he would call the number. He would talk to Mrs. Winters and learn about a piece of his family's history, that had nearly been lost to time. As he lay in bed that night, Andre couldn't help but think about how a simple act, giving up his seat on a bus, had connected him to his grandfather in a way he never could have imagined. It was as if the past and present had momentarily touched, creating a bridge across decades. He thought about Mrs. Winters, too. How she must have recognized something in him that reminded her of his grandfather from all those years ago. How strange and wonderful that she had been carrying that memory for 57 years, and now, by chance or fate, they had crossed paths. Sleep came slowly that night, Andre's mind filled with images of a young man who looked like him, standing up on a bus in a different time in a world very different from his own. He wondered what his grandfather had been thinking in that moment, if he had known that his small act of kindness would echo through time, connecting him to his grandson in a story that was only now beginning to unfold. The next morning dawned, bright and clear. Andre woke early, feeling a sense of anticipation he couldn't quite explain. The note was the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes, pinned to his bulletin board, catching the early morning light. Today, he would make that call. Today he would learn more about his grandfather and the elderly woman from the bus as he got ready for school. He found himself moving with purpose, as if every action was bringing him closer to understanding something important about his family, about himself. He carefully copied Mrs. Winters's phone number into his phone, making sure each digit was correct. His mother was already in the kitchen when he came downstairs, making lunches for him and Ty. She looked up as he entered, and something in her expression told Andre she had been thinking about the note too. "I called into work," she said, spreading peanut butter on bread. "Told them I needed the afternoon off. I thought maybe we could call Mrs. Winters together after you get home from school, if that's okay with you." Andre nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude. His mother worked hard, often taking extra shifts to make ends meet. Taking time off wasn't something she did lightly. "Yeah," he said. "I'd like that." She smiled, handing him his lunch. "Your grandmother's coming over too. She was up half the night," she said, "remembering things about your grandfather, about those early days. I think this has stirred up a lot for her." Andre put his lunch in his backpack, thinking about his quiet, dignified grandmother staying awake, revisiting memories of her late husband. "I never really thought about what it was like for them," he admitted. "Back then, I mean." His mother's expression grew serious. "No, I guess we don't think about it much, not in the day-to-day. But it's our history, Andre. Yours and mine and Ty's." She zipped up Ty's lunch bag. "And sometimes history finds ways to remind us that it's never really past." The school day dragged on for Andre. Each class seemed to last twice as long as usual, the clock on the wall barely moving its hands. His teachers' voices faded into background noise as his mind kept returning to the note, to Mrs. Winters, to the grandfather he thought he had known. During lunch, his friend Carlos noticed his distraction. "Earth to Andre," he said, waving a hand in front of Andre's face. "You in there, man?" Andre blinked, bringing his focus back to the crowded cafeteria. "Sorry, just thinking." "About the game next week?" Carlos asked, taking a bite of his sandwich. "Coach said you might start." "No, it's something else." Andre hesitated, then pulled out his phone and showed Carlos a picture he'd taken of the note. "This lady on the bus gave me this yesterday." Carlos read it, his eyebrows rising. "Whoa, that's wild. Your grandpa was in Montgomery during segregation? Like civil rights movement Montgomery?" "I guess so. My grandma never really talked about it." "Neither did he." "So what are you gonna do?" "I'm calling her today after school. My mom took the afternoon off and my grandma's coming over too." Carlos nodded slowly, handing the phone back. "That's heavy, man. Like finding out your grandpa was part of history or something." Andre hadn't thought about it that way, but Carlos was right. His grandfather, quiet, steady Thomas Walker, who had worked construction his whole life, who had taught Andre how to bait a hook and shoot a free throw, had lived through a time of profound change in America. And apparently, he had played some small part in it, even if it was just offering his seat to a pregnant woman on a bus. Yeah, Andre said. I guess it is. The final bell couldn't come soon enough. Andre rushed to his locker, skipping his usual after-school chat with friends, and hurried to catch the bus home. As he climbed aboard, he found himself scanning the faces of the passengers, half expecting to see Mrs. Winters again. But she wasn't there. The bus ride seemed to take forever. Andre's leg bounced with nervous energy as he stared out the window, barely registering the familiar streets passing by. What would Mrs. Winters tell them? What had his grandfather done that had stuck in her memory for nearly 6 decades when he finally walked through his front door? He found his mother and grandmother already waiting in the living room. His grandmother sat in the armchair by the window, a photo album open on her lap. His mother was on the couch, her phone in hand. "There he is," his grandmother said, looking up with a smile that didn't quite hide her nervousness. "Ready for this call?" Andre nodded, dropping his backpack and joining them. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the album. "Old photos," his grandmother said. "I was looking for pictures of your grandfather from that time. Found a few." She turned the album so Andre could see. There, in black and white, was a young man standing in front of a half-built house, tool belt around his waist, squinting slightly, in the sun. The resemblance was striking. The same tall, lean build, the same set of the shoulders. "That was taken in Montgomery," his grandmother said softly. "Summer of 1967. He sent it to me while I was still back home waiting for him, to save enough money so we could get married." Andre studied the photo, trying to imagine his grandfather at his age, living in a different world. "Did he ever talk to you about what it was like there?" His grandmother shook her head. "Not much. He'd say it was hot, that the work was hard, but the pay was good. Sometimes he'd mention going to church or a fish fry someone had hosted." She closed the album gently. "But there was a lot he didn't say. I could tell. When he came back, he was different, more serious, like he'd seen things that had changed him." Andre's mother checked her watch. "It's 4 o'clock. Should we make the call?" Andre pulled out his phone, the number already entered and ready to dial. His hand hovered over the call button. "What do I say?" "Just introduce yourself," his mother suggested. "Tell her you're Thomas Walker's grandson and that you got her note." Andre took a deep breath and pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He was beginning to think it would go to voicemail when there was a click and a voice, the same voice from the bus but slightly stronger now, answered. "Hello? Mrs. Winters? This is Andre Walker. We met on the bus yesterday. You gave me a note about my grandfather, Thomas Walker." There was a pause and then the voice warmed. "Andre, yes, I was hoping you'd call. Thank you for doing so." "My mom and grandmother are here with me," Andre said. "I have you on speaker." "Hello, Mrs. Winters," his mother said. "This is Denise Walker, Thomas's daughter-in-law. And I'm Ruth." "Walker?" his grandmother added. "Thomas was my husband." "It's a pleasure to speak with all of you," Mrs. Winters said. "Ruth, I've wondered about you over the years. Thomas spoke of you that day, you know. Said he had a girl back home he was going to marry as soon as he saved enough money." Andre watched his grandmother's eyes widen slightly, her hand going to her heart. "He did?" "Oh, yes. Very proudly, too. Said she was the smartest girl in their hometown and way too good for him." There was a smile in Mrs. Winters's voice now. His grandmother laughed softly, a sound tinged with both joy and sadness. "That sounds like Thomas." "Mrs. Winters," Andre said, leaning toward the phone. "Your note said my grandfather gave up his seat for you on a segregated bus. Could you tell us more about that day? About what happened?" There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, as if Mrs. Winters was gathering her thoughts, traveling back through time to that day in Montgomery. "It was July 1967, she began. "Hot, even for Alabama. I was 5 months pregnant with my first child and had been to see the doctor because I'd been feeling poorly. The diagnosis wasn't good. My blood pressure was dangerously high, and the doctor had told me I needed to rest to stay off my feet as much as possible, or I might lose the baby." Andre glanced at his mother and grandmother, who were listening intently, completely focused on Mrs. Winters's words. "I worked as a secretary at a law office downtown," Mrs. Winters continued. "My husband was overseas in Vietnam at the time. I caught the bus home after my appointment, and it was crowded as it always was at that hour. Back then, you understand, buses were still segregated in practice, if not by law. The Civil Rights Act had passed 3 years earlier. But change came, slowly in Montgomery." She paused, and Andre could hear the sound of ice clinking in a glass as if she had taken a sip of water before continuing. "I got on the bus and moved to the back, as was still expected. There were no seats available, and I was feeling dizzy, the heat and my condition making it hard to stay steady as the bus moved. I was holding onto a rail trying not to faint when your grandfather noticed me." Andre closed his eyes trying to picture the scene. A young Thomas Walker, not much older than himself, on a crowded bus in the Alabama heat. "He was sitting about halfway back," Mrs. Winters said. "A young black man in work clothes, probably. Just finished his shift. Without hesitation, he stood up and said, 'Ma'am, please take my seat.' Now you have to understand, in 1967, Montgomery, a black man offering his seat to a black woman was not unusual. But the way he did it, with such natural dignity, such simple human kindness, it caught the attention of several passengers." She took another sip of her drink. "I thanked him and sat down, grateful beyond words. I was truly afraid I might collapse if I had to stand much longer. Your grandfather moved to the back of the bus and stood holding a rail, just as you were doing yesterday, Andre. A white man who was sitting nearby started making comments, ugly comments about your grandfather not knowing his place. Another passenger joined in." Andre felt his stomach tighten. His mother reached over and placed her hand on his knee, a gesture of support as they listened to this difficult piece of family history. "Your grandfather didn't react," Mrs. Winters continued. "He just stood there, his back straight, his eyes forward, as if he couldn't hear them. But I could see his jaw clenching, his knuckles white where he gripped the rail. The driver eventually told the men to quiet down, not because he disagreed with them, mind you, but because they were disturbing the other passengers. When we reached my stop, I was feeling better from having sat down. As I got up to leave, I passed by your grandfather and whispered, 'Thank you,' again. He looked me in the eye, something many black men were careful not to do with strangers in those days, and said, 'My mother raised me right, ma'am, and my girl back home would expect no less of me.' That's when he mentioned you, Ruth. Said he was saving to marry a girl named Ruth who was too good for him." Andre heard his grandmother's soft intake of breath. "I never forgot that moment," Mrs. Winters said. "The simple courage it took not just to offer the seat but to stand tall afterward, to refuse to be diminished by the hatred around him. It may seem like a small thing now, but in that time, in that place, it was an act of quiet resistance." The living room was silent when she finished speaking. Andre looked at his grandmother, who was wiping tears from her eyes, and his mother, whose face showed a mix of pride and pain. "Mrs. Winters," his grandmother finally said, her voice thick with emotion, "thank you for sharing this story with us. Thomas never told me about this incident. He spoke very little about his time in Montgomery." "Many didn't talk about those days," Mrs. Winters replied gently. "Some memories were too painful, too raw, and for men like your husband there was often a desire to protect their loved ones from knowing the full reality of what they faced." Andre thought about his grandfather, the man who had taught him to fish and play basketball, who had attended every school event, who had been the solid center of their family until his passing. He had carried these experiences with him all those years, these moments of dignity in the face of hatred, without ever speaking of them. "Mrs. Winters," Andre said, "how did you recognize me on the bus yesterday? It's been so many years." There was a soft laugh on the other end of the phone. "When you get to be my age, young man, some memories stay crystal clear while yesterday's breakfast becomes a blur. Your grandfather's face on that hot July day is one of those clear memories. And you, Andre, you are his spitting image. Same eyes, same way of holding yourself, same instinctive kindness. When you offered me your seat, it was like seeing Thomas Walker all over again." "I'd like to meet you," Andre said suddenly. In person, I mean, to talk more about my grandfather in those times. I would like that very much, Mrs. Winters replied. In fact, I have something I'd like to show all of you. Would it be possible for you to visit me this weekend? Saturday, perhaps? Andre looked at his mother and grandmother, who both nodded their agreement. Yes, we can come on Saturday, he said. What time would be good for you? They arranged to visit Mrs. Winters at her home on Willow Street at 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. As they were about to end the call, Mrs. Winters added one more thing. Andre, what you did on that bus yesterday, giving up your seat to an old woman you didn't know. It might seem like a small thing, but kindness is never small. Your grandfather understood that. I'm glad to see that understanding runs in the family. After they hung up, the three of them sat in silence for a moment, absorbing everything they had heard. It was Ty who broke the quiet, coming into the room with his backpack, home from his after-school program. Did you talk to the bus lady? He asked, climbing onto the couch next to his mother. Andre nodded. Yeah, we did. She told us a story about Grandpa when he was young. A good story? Ty asked. Andre looked at his grandmother, who was still wiping away tears but smiling now too. Yeah, he said, a really good story. That evening, after dinner, Andre found his grandmother sitting on the back porch, looking through the photo album again. He sat down beside her, watching as she carefully turned the pages, each one filled with moments from the past. His grandfather as a young man, then holding his father as a baby, then teaching a young Andre how to ride a bike. Wish I had asked him more questions, his grandmother said softly. About Montgomery, about those days. I knew there were things he didn't talk about. But I always thought there would be time, that someday he would be ready to share those stories. Andre nodded, understanding the weight of untold stories, of questions never asked. Why do you think he never mentioned Mrs. Winters or what happened on that bus? His grandmother closed the album, her hands resting on its worn cover. Your grandfather was a proud man, but not in a boastful way. He believed in doing what was right without drawing attention to it. And I think some memories were just too painful to revisit. She turned to look at Andre, reaching out to touch his cheek. But I'm grateful to Mrs. Winters for sharing this story with us now, for helping us see a side of your grandfather that we never knew. And I'm proud of you, Andre, for being the kind of young man who would give up his seat on a bus, just like your grandfather did all those years ago. Andre felt a lump form in his throat. I didn't do anything special. Kindness is always special, his grandmother said, echoing Mrs. Winters' words. Especially in a world that doesn't always value it. As the evening grew darker and the first stars appeared in the sky, Andre thought about the connection that had been forged across time. His grandfather's act of kindness in 1967, his own, similar gesture decades later, and the elderly woman who had recognized the echo of one in the other. It was as if a circle had somehow been completed, a story that had been interrupted finding its proper ending. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. Andre had so many questions for Mrs. Winters, so many things he wanted to know about his grandfather and the world he had lived in. And somewhere in those questions, he sensed, were answers about himself as well, about who he was and who he might become. That night, as he lay in bed, Andre looked at the note pinned to his bulletin board. Some kindness runs in the blood, Mrs. Winters had written. He wondered what other qualities might run in his blood, what other stories from the past might be waiting to be discovered. For the first time, he felt a connection to history that was personal and immediate, not just dates and events in a textbook, but the lived experiences of people he loved, experiences that had shaped his family, and ultimately himself. Saturday. Morning dawned bright and clear. Andre woke early, too excited to sleep in despite it being the weekend. He lay in bed for a few minutes, thinking about the day ahead. What would Mrs. Winters be like in her own home? What was it she wanted to show them? Would they learn more about his grandfather's time in Montgomery? He got up and dressed carefully, choosing a button-down shirt his grandmother had given him for his birthday rather than his usual weekend t-shirt. Somehow, this visit felt like an occasion that deserved a little respect. Downstairs, he found his mother already in the kitchen making breakfast. She looked up as he entered and smiled. "You're up early," she said, flipping a pancake on the griddle. "Excited about today?" Andre nodded, getting plates from the cabinet to set the table. "Yeah. I keep thinking about what Mrs. Winters might tell us, about Grandpa and what it was like back then." His mother poured batter for another pancake. "Me too. Dad didn't talk much about those years even to me. I think there was a lot of pain there he didn't want to revisit." She paused, spatula in hand. "But I also think he would be proud that we're learning about it now, that his story isn't being lost." Ty came, bounding into the kitchen, still in his pajamas. "Are we going to see the bus lady today?" he asked, climbing onto a chair at the table. "Her name is Mrs. Winters," Andre reminded him, pouring orange juice into glasses. "And yes, we're going to her house this afternoon." "Is she nice?" Ty wanted to know. Andre thought about the elderly woman on the bus, her dignified bearing, her kind eyes. "Yeah, she's nice, and she knew Grandpa a long time ago." "Before I was born?" Andre laughed. "Way before you were born, little man. Before Mom was born even." Ty's eyes widened at the thought of something happening that far in the past. Their grandmother arrived just after lunch, dressed in her Sunday best, a navy blue dress with a string of pearls Thomas had given her for their 40th anniversary. She carried a small wrapped package. "What's that, Grandma?" Andre asked, gesturing to the package. "Just a little thank you for Mrs. Winters," his grandmother replied, "for reaching out to us, for sharing this piece of Thomas with us." There was a hint of nervousness in her voice, a slight tremor in her hands as she placed the package in her purse. They took his mother's car to Willow Street, driving through neighborhoods that grew progressively older as they went. This part of town had been built in the 1950s and 60s, and many of the houses retained their original charm. Ranch-style homes with neat front yards, mature trees lining the sidewalks. Mrs. Winters' house was at the end of the street, a small, but well-maintained place with a covered front porch and flower boxes blooming with bright red geraniums. As they pulled into the driveway, Andre felt a flutter of anticipation in his stomach. "This is it," his mother said, turning off the engine. "Everyone ready?" They walked to the front door together, Andre, his mother, his grandmother, and Ty, who was unusually quiet, perhaps sensing the importance of the moment. Andre's grandmother smoothed her dress and checked her hair before reaching out to press the doorbell. The chime echoed inside the house, followed by the sound of slow, measured footsteps. Then the door opened, and there stood Mrs. Winters. She was dressed simply but elegantly in a pale blue blouse and dark slacks, her white hair arranged in the same neat bun Andre had noticed on the bus. She smiled warmly at them. "The Walker family," she said. "How wonderful to meet you all properly. Please come in." She stepped back, opening the door wider to allow them to enter. The house was cool and smelled faintly of lemon polish and fresh flowers. The living room was furnished with pieces that looked like they had been carefully chosen decades ago and meticulously maintained ever since. A floral sofa, 2 armchairs, a coffee table with family photos arranged on its surface. "Please, sit down," Mrs. Winters said, gesturing to the sofa. "Can I get anyone something to drink? I have iced tea and lemonade." They all opted for lemonade, and Mrs. Winters disappeared briefly into the kitchen, returning with a tray of glasses and a plate of cookies. "My grandmother's recipe," she said, setting the tray on the coffee table. "She always said no guest should leave your home without being offered something sweet." Once they were all settled with their drinks, Andre's grandmother spoke up. "Mrs. Winters, I want to thank you for reaching out to Andre, for sharing that story about Thomas. It means more than I can say to learn about this part of his life." Mrs. Winters nodded, her expression softening. "Please call me Eleanor. And I should be thanking you, Ruth. Your husband's kindness that day meant a great deal to me, more than he could have known." "How so?" Andre asked, curious. Eleanor took a sip of her lemonade before answering. "As I mentioned on the phone, I was having a difficult pregnancy. My husband was in Vietnam and I was alone, working full-time, trying to make ends meet. That day, after my doctor's appointment, I was feeling very low, scared for my baby, missing my husband, struggling with the everyday indignities of being a black woman in Montgomery at that time. She set her glass down carefully on a coaster. When your grandfather offered me his seat, it wasn't just the physical relief of being able to sit down. It was a moment of human connection, of dignity, in a time and place where those things were, often in short supply. And the way he handled the ugly comments afterward, with such quiet strength, it gave me hope. Hope that things could change, that they were changing, one person, one act of decency at a time. Andre's grandmother reached into her purse and took out the wrapped package. "I brought something for you," she said, handing it to Eleanor. "Just a small token of appreciation." Eleanor unwrapped the package carefully. Inside was a framed photograph, the same one Andre had seen in the album, of his grandfather standing in front of a half-built house in Montgomery. "Oh my," Eleanor said softly, touching the glass over Thomas's face. "He looks just as I remember him. So young. It's the only picture we have from his time in Montgomery," Andre's grandmother explained. "I thought you might like to have it." Eleanor looked up, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you, Ruth. This is a precious gift." She studied the photograph for another moment before setting it carefully on the side table next to her chair. "Now I have something to show all of you as well, if you'll give me a moment." She rose slowly and walked to a bookshelf on the far wall of the living room. From the top shelf, she took down a large leather-bound album, similar to the one Andre's grandmother had been looking through, but older, its edges worn with years of handling. "After our phone call, I spent yesterday afternoon looking through my old papers," Eleanor said, returning to her seat with the album. "I knew I had kept something from that time that I wanted to share with you." She opened the album, turning pages carefully until she found what she was looking for. "Here," she said, removing a yellowed newspaper clipping and handing it to Andre. "This might interest you." The clipping was from the Montgomery Advertiser, dated July 15, 1967. The headline read, "Local Teacher Documents Daily Acts of Courage." The article featured a younger Eleanor Winters, identified as a secretary at a law firm and part-time history teacher at the local Negro college. It described her project to record and preserve stories of everyday resistance and dignity within Montgomery's black community during the ongoing struggle for civil rights. "I wasn't just a secretary," Eleanor explained as they read the article. "I was working toward my teaching certificate, taking night classes at Alabama State. The lawyer I worked for was sympathetic to the civil rights movement, quietly so, given the climate at the time, and he encouraged my project." Andre looked up from the article. "So you were collecting stories like what happened with my grandfather on the bus?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes. Not the big moments that made headlines, the marches, the speeches, the legal victories, though those were vital, of course, but the small daily acts of courage and dignity that never made it into the history books. A mother insisting her children be treated with respect at a store counter. A man refusing to step off the sidewalk when a white person approached. A woman speaking up when someone used a derogatory term in her presence." She turned more pages in her album. "After your grandfather's kindness on the bus, I spoke with him again. He was at a church supper the following Sunday. Many of the construction workers who had come to Montgomery for work attended the same church. I asked if I could include his story in my collection. What did he say?" Andre's grandmother asked. "He was reluctant at first," Eleanor said with a small smile. "Said he hadn't done anything special, just what anyone would do. But I convinced him that these everyday moments of human decency were important to record, especially in times that could make you lose faith in humanity." She removed another item from the album, a typed page, the paper thin and delicate with age. "He finally agreed to let me interview him. This is the account I wrote based on our conversation." Andre took the page carefully, aware that he was holding a piece of history, his family's history, in his hands. The account was written in the third person, describing the incident on the bus much as Eleanor had told it to them over the phone, but with more details. It mentioned that Thomas had been working in Montgomery for 4 months at that point, that he attended Dexter Avenue Baptist Church when his work schedule allowed, that he had once shaken Dr. King's hand at a community meeting shortly before King left Montgomery for Atlanta. Dr. King? Andre looked up, surprised. Grandpa met Dr. King. Eleanor nodded. Many people did in those years in Montgomery. Dr. King was a presence in the community before he became the icon we remember today. Your grandfather mentioned it only briefly during our interview. Said it was just a handshake after a meeting. Nothing special. But it meant something to him, I could tell. Andre's grandmother was reading over his shoulder, her finger tracing the lines of text as if to better connect with the words, with the husband she had known for over 50 years, but who had kept this part of his life largely to himself. There's more, Eleanor said, turning more pages in her album. Your grandfather became interested in my project. He started introducing me to other construction workers, other men who had come to Montgomery for work, and found themselves navigating the complexities of race in the Deep South during a time of great change. She showed them more typed accounts, stories of men who had stood their ground in small but significant ways, who had maintained their dignity in the face of daily humiliations, who had built not just houses but community in a place far from home. These stories never made it into any history book, Eleanor continued. But they're an important part of how change happens, not just through laws and court decisions and famous speeches, but through countless individual moments of courage and decency. Ty, who had been remarkably patient throughout the conversation, his attention divided between the adults' talk and the plate of cookies, suddenly spoke up. Did you have your baby, Mrs. Winters? The one you were carrying on the bus? Eleanor smiled at him. Yes, I did. A healthy baby boy named David. He's 57 now, a doctor in Chicago with 3 children of his own. She pointed to a family photo on the wall, a middle-aged man with Eleanor's same warm smile standing with his wife and 3 teenagers. That's my son and his family. And your husband? Andre's mother asked. Did he come home safely from Vietnam? A shadow crossed Eleanor's face. Yes, he did, though not without scars, both visible and invisible. He passed away 10 years ago. Heart attack. But we had 40 good years together, raised our son, saw our grandchildren born. She closed the album gently. After I finished my teaching certificate, I taught history at Carver High School for over 30 years. I always included stories like your grandfather's in my lessons, the everyday courage that moves history forward inch by inch. Students need to know that history isn't just made by famous figures, but by ordinary people making choices every day about how to live with dignity and treat others with respect. Andre thought about this, about how his grandfather's simple act of offering a seat to a pregnant woman had been part of something larger, something important enough that this woman had preserved the memory for nearly 6 decades. I have a favor to ask, Eleanor said, looking directly at Andre. I'm working with the local historical society to create an archive of these stories, to preserve them for future generations. Would you allow me to include your grandfather's story? And would you, Andre, consider adding your own perspective, what it means to you to learn about this part of your family's history? Andre glanced at his mother and grandmother, who both nodded encouragingly. Yes, he said. I'd be honored to do that. Eleanor smiled, reaching out to pat his hand. Thank you. It's important work, connecting the past to the present, helping young people understand how history lives on in them. They talked for another hour, sharing stories about Thomas Walker, Eleanor's memories of him from that brief time in Montgomery, and the family's memories of the man he became in the decades that followed. Ty eventually wandered out to the backyard, where Eleanor showed him a small vegetable garden she maintained and let him pick a ripe tomato to take home. As the afternoon light began to soften, signaling it was time to leave, Eleanor disappeared into another room and returned with a small wooden box. One last thing I wanted to show you, she said, opening the box and removing a small pin, a black hand and a white hand clasped together in unity. This was given to me by a member of the Montgomery Improvement Association back in 1967. I've kept it all these years as a reminder of what we were working toward, not just legal equality, but human connection, recognition of our shared dignity. She held the pin out to Andre's grandmother. I'd like you to have it, Ruth. A memento of the man you loved who showed such quiet courage all those years ago. Andre's grandmother took the pin carefully, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know what to say. No words needed, Eleanor replied, gently. Just knowing that Thomas's story lives on in his family, that his grandson carries not just his face but his spirit, that's more than enough. As they prepared to leave, Andre hung back for a moment while his mother and grandmother helped Ty gather the tomatoes and herbs Eleanor had insisted they take from her garden. Mrs. Winters. Eleanor, he said. Thank you, not just for telling us about my grandfather, but for recognizing him on that bus, for seeing me. He paused, struggling to find the right words. It's like you helped bring a part of him back to us. Eleanor studied his face, her eyes gentle. You know, Andre, history isn't just what happened in the past. It's alive in us, in the choices we make every day. When you offered me your seat on that bus, you weren't just being polite. You were, without even knowing it, continuing a family tradition of simple human decency. Never underestimate the power of such moments. On the drive home, the car was quiet, each of them absorbed in their own thoughts. Andre looked out the window at the passing neighborhoods, thinking about the threads that connected him to his grandfather, to a time before he was born, to choices made decades ago that somehow still echoed in the present. His grandmother sat beside him in the back seat, the pin Eleanor had given her clutched in her hand, occasionally wiping away a tear. Andre put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, grateful for the comfort. Are you okay, Grandma? He asked softly. She nodded. Yes, dear, just thinking about your grandfather, about how much I miss him and how there was still so much about him I never knew. She looked down at the pin. But today, it feels like I got a piece of him back, a piece I never even knew was missing. In the front seat. His mother caught his eye in the rearview mirror and smiled, a smile full of pride and love, and a hint of wonder at the unexpected ways the past could suddenly reach into the present, reshaping their understanding of who they were and where they had come from. Ty, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. Mom, can we go back and visit Mrs. Winters again sometime? She said she'd show me how to plant tomatoes. I think we will be seeing more of Mrs. Winters, his mother replied. She's become part of our family story now. And as they turned onto their street, heading home with new understanding and a deeper connection to their past, Andre thought about kindness, how it could echo across decades, how a simple act on a crowded bus could create ripples that touched lives in ways the giver might never know. His grandfather had never sought recognition for what he did that day in Montgomery. He had simply done what he believed was right, what his mother had raised him to do, what the woman he loved would expect of him. Andre touched the phone in his pocket, thinking about the basketball team group chat he'd been part of earlier that morning, about the casual comments some of his teammates had made about the new girl in school, comments that had made him uncomfortable, but that he had let pass without speaking up. Tomorrow at practice, he decided he would say something, nothing dramatic, just a quiet word about respect, about treating people with dignity. Some kindness runs in the blood, Mrs. Winters had written in her note. And now, Andre understood that it wasn't just kindness, but courage too. The courage to stand up, to speak up, to do what's right even when it isn't easy. His grandfather had passed down more than just his features. He had passed down a legacy of quiet strength, of everyday decency, that Andre was only now beginning to fully appreciate. As they pulled into their driveway, the setting sun casting long shadows across the yard, Andre made a silent promise to his grandfather, to himself, to be worthy of that legacy, to carry it forward in his own life, in his own time. To remember that history wasn't just something that happened long ago to famous people in textbooks, but something that lived in everyday choices, in small acts of courage and kindness that might not make headlines but that could, in their own way, change the world. The following week passed in a whirlwind of activity, for Andre smiled overhearing this exchange. That was precisely what Eleanor had been trying to teach him, what this whole project had been about, recognizing the heroism in everyday actions, understanding how ordinary people shape history through their choices, their courage, their simple acts of human decency. The exhibition ran for 3 months, drawing visitors from across the city and even from neighboring towns. Schools organized field trips, community groups held discussions, local media covered the story. What had begun with a chance encounter on a bus, Andre offering his seat to an elderly woman, had blossomed into something that touched hundreds of lives, that preserved pieces of history that might otherwise have been lost. As summer approached, bringing with it the end of the school year, Andre received news that thrilled him. His project had been selected for a statewide youth history competition. He would be presenting his work, along with Eleanor, at the state capitol in June. "I never imagined it would go this far," he told his mother, as they prepared dinner the night he received the news. "It all started with just giving up my seat on the bus." His mother smiled, squeezing his shoulder affectionately. "Sometimes the smallest actions lead to the biggest changes. I think that's one of the lessons in all of this." The day of the competition arrived hot and bright, reminiscent of that July day in 1967 when Thomas Walker had offered his seat to a pregnant Eleanor Winters. Andre, his family, and Eleanor made the 2-hour drive to the Capitol together, talking excitedly about the presentation they had prepared. The competition was held in a grand old building downtown, its marble hallways echoing with the voices of students and teachers from across the state. Andre felt a flutter of nerves as he set up their display, arranging photographs and documents on the assigned table, making sure the laptop was ready to show their digital presentation. Eleanor, despite her age, was calm and focused, greeting other participants with warm interest, answering questions about the project with clarity and passion. "You remind me of your grandfather today," she told Andre quietly as they waited for the judges to reach their table. He had that same look of determination when faced with a challenge. When the judges arrived, 3 historians from state universities, Andre and Eleanor presented their project together, explaining how it had begun with a chance encounter that connected past and present, how it had grown to include dozens of stories of everyday courage during the civil rights era, how it had engaged their community in preserving and sharing this vital history. The judges asked thoughtful questions, examined the materials they had brought, watched a portion of their digital presentation. One of them, an older man with silver hair and kind eyes, spent a long time studying the photograph of Thomas. School, basketball practice, his regular chores at home, all the normal rhythms of his life continued, but something had shifted inside him. The stories Eleanor Winters had shared, the connection to his grandfather he had discovered, had awakened something new in his understanding of himself and his place in the world. On Monday, true to the promise he had made to himself, Andre had spoken up at basketball practice when some of his teammates were making comments about the new girl. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet, "Come on, guys, that's not cool. How would you feel if someone talked about your sister that way?" There had been a moment of awkward silence, then Carlos had backed him up. "Andre's right. Let's focus on getting ready for the game." And just like that, the conversation had shifted. It was a small moment, easily forgotten in the flow of the day. But Andre had felt something important in it. The weight of choice, of using his voice, of standing for something. His grandfather would have understood. Wednesday brought the championship game against Jefferson High, their biggest rival. Coach had kept his word. And Tew. Dre was in the starting lineup, nervousness and excitement making his heart race as he stepped onto the court. His family was in the stands, his mother, grandmother, and Ty, all wearing the school colors, all cheering as his name was announced. The game was tight from the beginning, neither team able to pull ahead by more than a few points. By the fourth quarter, Andre's legs were burning with fatigue, but he pushed through, remembering his grandfather's quiet endurance, his ability to stand tall even when it wasn't easy. With 30 seconds left on the clock and his team down by 1 point, Andre found himself with the ball at the 3-point line. The defender was closing in fast. In that split second, he remembered Eleanor's words about his grandfather on the bus, standing his ground, refusing to be intimidated. Andre took the shot. The ball arced through the air, seeming to hang at its peak for an impossible moment, before dropping cleanly through the net. The gym erupted in cheers. His teammates surrounded him, slapping his back, their faces bright with the joy of imminent victory. When the final buzzer sounded, confirming their win by 2 points, Coach gave him the game ball, saying simply, "You earned this today." But the real moment of triumph came afterward, when his grandmother hugged him tightly and whispered, "Your grandfather would have been so proud." In her eyes, Andre saw not just pride in the game-winning shot, but recognition of the young man he was becoming, the character he was showing both on and off the court. On Friday afternoon, Eleanor Winters called. She had been working with the Historical Society, she explained, and they were planning an exhibition called Everyday Courage, Montgomery's Untold Stories. Would the Walker family be willing to participate in the opening event next month? Thomas's story would be featured, along with photographs and oral histories from others who had lived through that time. Andre's mother and grandmother readily agreed, and plans were made to meet at the Historical Society the following week to record their perspectives. Ruth's memories of Thomas, Denise's reflections on growing up with a father who had been part of this history, and Andre's thoughts on discovering this legacy. The weekend brought another visit to Eleanor's house, this time with a purpose. She had asked Andre to help her digitize some of her collection of stories and photographs. "My hands aren't as steady as they once were," she had explained, "and this work needs young eyes and fingers." So on Saturday morning, Andre found himself in Eleanor's spare bedroom, which she had converted into a small office, carefully scanning fragile documents and photographs into her computer. Each page, each image was a window into a world he had only read about in history books. Ordinary people living through extraordinary times, finding ways to maintain their dignity and humanity in the face of systemic injustice. "What made you start collecting these stories?" Andre asked as Eleanor sorted through another box of materials, selecting items for him to scan. She looked up, considering the question. "I suppose it was seeing how the big stories, the marches, the speeches, the court cases were being recorded for history, but the small, everyday acts of resistance were being lost. And I believed then, as I do now, that real change happens, person by person, moment by moment, in these quiet acts of courage and decency." She handed him a photograph, a group of black construction workers, his grandfather among them, standing in front of a newly completed church. This was taken in August 1967, just a few weeks after I met Thomas on the bus. These men volunteered their time on weekends to rebuild a church that had been damaged in what the authorities called an accident, though everyone knew it was arson. Andre studied the faces in the photograph, young men in work clothes, their expressions serious but with a hint of pride in what they had accomplished. His grandfather stood at the end of the row, tall and straight-backed, looking directly at the camera. "They weren't trying to make history," Eleanor continued. "They were just doing what needed to be done, helping their community, standing together. But in doing so, they were part of the change that was slowly, painfully transforming this country." As Andre scanned the photograph, carefully adjusting the settings to capture the details clearly, he thought about the layers of history contained in this single image, the story of the church, the men who rebuilt it, the community it served, all against the backdrop of the larger struggle for civil rights. "Do you think they knew?" he asked. "The people in these photos, the ones in your stories, did they know they were making history?" Eleanor considered this. Some did, I suppose. The leaders, the organizers, they understood they were part of a movement, part of something larger than themselves. But most were just living their lives as best they could, making choices day by day about how to maintain their dignity, how to create a better future for their children. She touched the photograph gently. "Your grandfather, I think, understood more than he let on. He was quiet, observant. He paid attention. When we talked for my project, he spoke about the changes he could see happening, not just in laws, but in people's minds and hearts. He believed in the work, even if he wasn't on the front lines." The rest of the day passed quickly as they worked through Eleanor's collection. By late afternoon, they had digitized dozens of documents and photographs, creating a digital archive that could be shared with the Historical Society, and eventually made available to researchers, students, and community members interested in this period of the city's history. As Andre was preparing to leave, Eleanor handed him a manila envelope. "This is for you," she said. "Copies of everything related to your grandfather that we scanned today, plus a few other items I thought you might like to have." Andre thanked her, touched by her thoughtfulness. "This means a lot to me," he said. "Learning about this part of my family's history, about what Grandpa did during those years." Eleanor smiled. "History isn't just something that happens to other people, Andre. It's something we all participate in, whether we realize it or not. The choices we make, the stands we take or don't take, they all become part of the story." On the drive home, Andre thought about this idea, that history wasn't just the past, but a continuing story that he was part of. The championship, game, speaking up for the new girl, helping Eleanor preserve these stories, these were his contributions to the narrative, small though they might seem in the grand scheme of things. The following week brought another development. Andre's history teacher, Mr. Patton, had assigned a project on the civil rights movement, asking students to research an aspect of this period that wasn't widely covered in textbooks. When Andre mentioned his grandfather's experience in Montgomery and Eleanor Winter's collection of stories about everyday resistance, Mr. Patton was immediately interested. "That's exactly the kind of history this project is meant to uncover," he said. "Would you be willing to share some of this with the class? Maybe Mrs. Winters would even be willing to speak to us." Andre discussed it with his family and with Eleanor, who readily agreed. "This is why I've preserved these stories all these years," she told him, "so they can be passed on, so young people can understand that history is made not just by famous figures, but by ordinary people making choices about how to live with dignity and courage." 2 weeks later, Eleanor Winters stood before Andre's history class. Her voice strong as she shared stories from her collection, she spoke about the daily realities of life in a segregated city, about the small acts of resistance that rarely made headlines, but that gradually changed what was possible and acceptable. And she told them about Thomas Walker, about a hot July day on a crowded bus, about a simple act of kindness that had stayed with her for nearly 6 decades. The students listened with rapt attention, asking thoughtful questions, making connections to their own lives and to current events. Andre, sitting in the front row, felt a surge of pride in his grandfather and Eleanor in being part of bringing these stories to a new generation. After class, Mr. Patton pulled Andre aside. "This is important work," he said. "Preserving these stories, making these connections between past and present. Have you thought about where this project might lead?" Andre hadn't. Not really. He'd been focused on learning about his grandfather, on helping Eleanor with her archive, on fulfilling the class assignment. But Mr. Patton's question opened up new possibilities. That evening, Andre discussed it with his family over dinner. "Mr. Patton thinks we should consider expanding the project," he explained. "Maybe interview other people from that generation, collect more stories about everyday resistance and courage during the civil rights era." His mother nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds valuable, and it connects to what Mrs. Winters has been doing all these years." "I could help," his grandmother offered. "I know several people from church who lived through those times. They might be willing to share their stories." Ty, always ready to be included, piped up, "I can help too. I can hold the camera when you interview people." And so a new phase of the project began. Over the next few months, Andre, with help from his family, Eleanor, and eventually several classmates who joined the effort, recorded interviews with older members of the community who had lived through the civil rights era. They collected photographs, letters, newspaper clippings, pieces of history that might otherwise have been lost. The Historical Society's exhibition, Everyday Courage, opened in the spring, featuring not just Eleanor's original collection but the new materials Andre and his team had gathered. Thomas Walker's story was there, alongside dozens of others. Ordinary people who had, in their own ways, contributed to the long struggle for equality and justice. On opening night, Andre stood with his family and Eleanor, watching as visitors moved through the exhibition, stopping to read the stories, study the photographs, listen to the recorded interviews. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction seeing his grandfather's photograph prominently displayed, his story preserved for future generations. "You've done a remarkable thing," Eleanor said, standing beside him. "You've helped ensure these stories won't be forgotten." Andre shook his head modestly. "I just followed your lead. You're the one who's been preserving these stories for decades." Eleanor smiled. "That's how it works, you know. One generation passes the torch to the next. I collected these stories, but you and your generation will carry them forward, find new meaning in them, use them to understand your own times." As the evening progressed, Andre noticed a group of younger children gathered around the interactive display he had helped create. A touchscreen that allowed visitors to explore maps of Montgomery from that era, listen to audio clips, and learn about the places where everyday acts of resistance had occurred. The children were engaged, curious, asking questions of their parents and grandparents. One boy, about Ty's age, pointed to the photograph of Thomas Walker and the other construction workers rebuilding the church. "Who are they?" he asked his grandmother. "Those are heroes," she replied simply. "Ordinary heroes who helped change the world." The boy studied the photograph for a long moment. "They look like regular people," he said. "That's exactly right," his grandmother told him. "That's exactly what makes them heroes." Andre,